The United States of America is regularly portraying itself as a land that was established by strict Puritans who believed that sexual contact was a sin that should be avoided at all costs. Despite this, early Americans continued to become hooked. At the end of the day, settlers needed to find a way to occupy their new home. Intimacy during the colonial period was somewhat constrained, and hygiene was an entirely different problem to take into consideration. Nonetheless, this historical period was not devoid of its passion. People were known to engage in premarital affairs, despite the fact that they did not have the same level of freedom as they do today. At that time, however, if you were detected indulging in the deed, you were supposed to do the thing that was considered socially acceptable, which was to marry your partner immediately. A few of the founding fathers themselves were among the most prominent advocates of physical intimacy during the time of the Revolutionary War. The famed red light area in Philadelphia was frequented by Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams was known for cracking jokes that were considered to be vulgar. Despite the fact that the times may have changed, the normal human mind remains to be fascinated by the concept of interaction. Also, if you resided in the United States during the Revolutionary War, it was not just a marital obligation, but also a means of escape. Benjamin Franklin offered indelicate advice. Benjamin Franklin had a reputation for having a sophisticated manner. During the Revolutionary War, it was in part because of this that he was chosen to be the candidate who would lead France to victory. However, he also utilized his charm to seek out women and was quite forthright when it came to addressing romantic relationships. A piece of advice on how to locate a mistress is included in one of Franklin's letters. The most important piece of advice he ever gave was to stick to older ladies. Franklin believes that their older age and greater level of experience make them more discreet lovers, but he was hardly respectful in his aims, stating, "The face first grows lank and wrinkled, then the neck, then the breast and arms, the lower parts continue to the last as plump as ever." Dating partners were sometimes stuffed in burlap sacks. The practice of having sexual encounters prior to marriage was frowned upon in colonial America. Nonetheless, this did not prevent it from occurring. Consequently, the arrangement known as bundling was established in order to make it possible for engaged couples to reside at the girl's house while being supervised by their parents. In order to prevent any parts of the young lovers' bodies from coming into contact with one another, they would be placed inside a sack that was fashioned like a large sleeping bag and had the midsection sewed together. Additionally, there were variants of this established custom. It is possible that the unmarried couple could be allowed to share a bed in order to keep warm, provided that a board is placed between them. It is also possible that parents will just keep a careful eye on them. Obviously, these strategies did not always yield the desired results. During the middle to late 1700s, it is estimated that around 1 in 3 brides were pregnant at the time they said, "I do." Common law marriage made acceptable intercourse easier. The practice of physical closeness was believed to be reserved for married couples in the Americas throughout the colonial era. To their good fortune, getting married was a simple process. All that was required of a pair was to kiss and make a public declaration that they were husband and wife. Common law marriage, often known as hand fasting, was a process that was brought to the colonies by English settlers. It was a simple and speedy method. Despite this, not all of these marriages were successful. After the marriage had been consummated, it was all too easy for a spouse to leave the connection because there were no legal paperwork to authenticate the union and witnesses were not required. This made it extremely simple for the spouse to terminate the relationship. There were same-sex relationships. The issue of same-sex partnerships has been around from the beginning of humans, and the colonial period was not an exception to this rule. However, history texts have a tendency to avoid discussing the topic. It has been established by historians that not only were such partnerships present in the Americas throughout the Revolutionary War, but that a significant number of them were documented through correspondence. Records strongly imply that same-sex partners existed during the battle for American independence, despite the fact that most institutions prohibited men from engaging in intimate relationships with one another. Sex work didn't really exist outside of cities. It is possible to imagine that the cities of the past were teeming with sex workers. Nevertheless, this was not the case in the communities that existed in colonial America. This kind of job was discouraged by widespread religious beliefs, and the demographics of the people simply did not sustain large-scale operations. In spite of the fact that it was still in existence, the industry in the countryside was neither centralized nor adequately recorded. Nevertheless, there were a greater number of workers employed in the trade in large settlements such as New York and Philadelphia and other cities. Jefferson fathered children with an enslaved woman. In spite of the fact that he carried a large number of slaves throughout his life, Thomas Jefferson is still revered for his liberal beliefs. Sally Hemings was one of the individuals who was referred to as his concubine in papers from the 19th century. Nevertheless, academics are uncertain as to whether or not the relationship was voluntary. It is quite likely that Jefferson was the father of Hemings' 6 children, which led to scandalous rumors and speculation during his administration. In spite of the fact that the children had light skin and resembled Jefferson, his family insisted that his nephews were the ones who were actually the fathers of the children. It was discovered, however, that Jefferson himself was most likely the father of Hemings' children, according to the numerous DNA testing that were conducted in recent times. There were no shops catering to self-pleasure. Toys that are used for the purpose of self-pleasure are probably as old as sexual activity itself. However, there is no evidence of toys that date back to the time of the colonial era in the United States. Given that a significant number of the colonists adhered to the Puritan religion, it is quite probable that toys of this kind were not discussed or sold in public. Dirty jokes and songs were popular. It was not the stringent morals of the colonial Americans that prevented them from making jokes about sexual encounters. Even the sleazy remark that John Adams overheard was written down by him. One told of a man whose friends tricked him into thinking he had contracted gonorrhea from a lady of the evening. He went to the doctor and was salivated for the clap. Then they sent him before Justice Phillips, then before Justice Tyler. In short, they played upon him till they provoked him so that he swore he would beat the brains out of the first man that came into his shop. Another recounted the story of a man who was a better prophet than Elijah, for he stretched himself on her but once to bring her to life, whereas Elijah did 3 times. He breathed into her the breath of life. Philadelphia had its own red light district. In the time period in question, Philadelphia was one of the largest cities in the United States, and a huge population meant that there were more opportunities for intimate encounters. Helltown, which was riddled with poverty, violence, and sex work, was the most notorious of the rough neighborhoods in the city. Helltown was also the most notorious neighborhood. It was said that Benjamin Franklin himself had a few women from this region with whom he had a romantic relationship. People began marrying for love. A significant number of marriages in early America were arranged. However, during the 18th century, love emerged as a more significant factor to take into account when forming marriages. Historically, marriages were arranged in order to strengthen the power of the family. But around the time of the Revolutionary War, the control that parents had over their offspring began to decrease. Evidently, there was a spirit of defiance in the air. We hope you liked this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.